Hello, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. The London meeting of high-ranking representatives from the United States, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and Ukraine was effectively cancelled just a few hours before it was set to begin. After it became known that the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and the special representative of the US President, Steve Witkoff, were refraining from participating in this meeting, and the only representative of the United States during this discussion on ending the Russian-Ukrainian war would be President Trump's special representative, Keith Kellogg. It also became clear to the national security advisors and foreign ministers of the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Ukraine that attending such a meeting was unlikely to make sense. However, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha is still in London and will likely hold talks with his British counterpart David Lammy. However, this will no longer take place within the framework of the multilateral process that was attempted to be initiated in Paris. As is known, the meeting in London was supposed to be the second round of negotiations after high-ranking representatives from the United States, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Ukraine discussed a common position on ending the Russian-Ukrainian war in Paris. But even after the meeting in Paris, it became evident that the United States administration was counting not so much on developing a common position, but rather on European countries and Ukraine agreeing with the unrealistic vision held by President Donald Trump and his closest circle. It was absolutely no coincidence that immediately after the Paris meeting, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio emphasized that if agreements between Russia and Ukraine could not be reached in a short period, the United States would completely withdraw from further participation in the negotiations. In other words, President Trump's administration resorted to blatant blackmail, both blackmailing partners and blackmailing Russia, hoping that the parties would agree to such tactics and accept any proposals put forward by the White House administration. The results of this blackmail turned out to be, in my opinion, unexpected for the Trump administration itself. It turned out that Putin is actually trying to keep Trump at the negotiating table, and we know why. In order to continue military actions against Ukraine amidst these negotiations and make Trump and his ministers accomplices in his crimes, staining the hands of the American president with the blood of Ukrainian civilians. However, in Kyiv and European capitals, they obviously did not agree with the blackmail, particularly with the United States proposals to officially recognize the Russian status of Crimea, annexed back in 2014. The points of the so-called peace plan that appeared in the media on the eve of the London meeting could once again convince that the main object of blackmail by the Trump administration remains Ukraine. And the fact that the United States is unwilling to take any part, in providing security guarantees for Ukraine, while at the same time continuing to hope for the signing of the famous mineral agreement, makes the actions of the Trump administration less those of politicians interested in security in Europe and more a tactic, but of looters. Moreover, it could be realized that the Trump administration also takes an absolutely unrealistic position regarding Russia, hoping that Putin will agree to those points of the peace agreement that will directly affect his own, albeit bizarre, vision of Russian sovereignty. Yes, alongside ideas about recognizing the occupied Crimea as legitimate territory of the Russian Federation, which effectively destroys all post-war international law, there was also a proposal to transfer control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the United States. Although, from the perspective of the Russian Constitution and Putin himself, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is not located in some neutral territory or gray zone, but simply on the territory of the so-called Zaporizhzhia region of the Russian Federation. And to agree that specialists from the United States will control a nuclear facility on territory that is considered by Moscow itself to be Russian territory is without a doubt an obvious foreign policy defeat for the Russian president, a defeat that he is unlikely to accept. And again, among the points of the so-called peace plan that are now being published in various media, it is possible that these are only proposals from the Americans. And these proposals may also be provided by different American agencies. So, among these points, there are many aspects that seem to illustrate the complete inadequacy of the United States President's administration, if indeed all these proposals are coming from Donald Trump. And then a rather simple question arises: is it really Trump's task to achieve any agreements between Russia and Ukraine? Or is it that Trump, having realized the unrealistic nature of his populist promises regarding the end of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and we remember this absurd talk about 24 or 48 hours, which the American president himself later called a joke, is his main task simply to withdraw from further negotiations and blame Ukraine and Russia for being unconstructive? Preferably, of course, Ukraine, because the money-hungry American president continues to hope for some financial agreements with Russia. But I don't think Trump will be able to easily implement this unrealistic plan either, because he will be questioned about what he has done to end the Russian-Ukrainian war, both in the United States and around the world. And, in my opinion, these calculations of the American president may encounter the same fate as all other calculations of Donald Trump. During these inglorious first 100 days of his disgraceful presidency, namely a fiasco, after which he will have to return to real life, which is the main enemy of Trump and his supporters. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social media, to the channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello, which help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube itself. Victory and peace to you. Good luck.